Welcome to Bryant-Denny Stadium here in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, home of the Alabama Crimson Tide, as we just saw 3 more wonderful state championship games here at the Super 7 in 2015. First off, we started off with the 3A championship game. Piedmont coming in out of the north, taking on Bayside Academy. A little bit of a surprise coming out of the south, Bayside Academy instead of Gordo, T.R. Miller. Still, the Admirals were here. The first time they've been in the Super 7, and, you know, we both thought yesterday Piedmont was going to be the team that could just run over Bayside Academy, and it kind of happened. They did win 44-7. How did it happen? How did they win so big?
Well, genetics for one. They're bigger, they're faster, they're stronger, and they utilized that. They really got after. They enforced their will running the football with 4 different ball carriers, including the MVP on the night, Taylor Hayes, the quarterback, who carried most of the load, especially when Darnell Jackson was struggling. Jackson ended up finishing with about 60-something yards rushing the football, about 61 yards, and Hayes ended up with 67 and then tacked on over 100 yards passing, which were big difference makers in the game, including Hayes' 3 touchdowns on the day. Overall, though, mostly it was a defensive battle from Piedmont. That's what really contained Bayside Academy and won this day.
Talk about Hayes, talk about all the great plays they made. Who's the one player that stood out for you? Who should have been your MVP for the game?
I'm not going to go one player. I'm going to go the entire Piedmont defense. They were so dominating. It was unbelievable. I know Bayside is young and that they're inexperienced at this point, but I didn't expect Piedmont to absolutely shellac Admiral's offense to 7 points and hold them that far. They held Bayside, who ran 47 times today, to 130 yards. That's an absolute mugging, almost 3 yards a carry, actually less than 3 yards a carry. And then that also allowed their offense to get things going in the second half. It allowed them to be more free-flowing and utilize or get good field position, because they didn't really have that in the first half. They struggled a little bit in the first half. I believe the score was closer to about 16-point difference, a little closer than maybe we would have expected. Right. But Piedmont hadn't really taken control of the game the way they wanted to, and their defense, doing what they did in the second half, allowed them to completely dominate Bayside from the beginning of the second half until the final gun.
All right, like we talked about, Bayside, it's their first time in the Super 7. They did lose pretty bad today, but it's a little bit of a newer school. What can Bayside Academy take from this game as they head into next season?
They're fairly young. As I said earlier, they're young. Of the entire roster, only 10 guys are seniors. This is a team that's going to be ready to go next year. Just remember how they came here with a 7-3 regular season. Just know it can be done. Remember the fact that Cedar Bluff, a team that we saw here today, and we'll talk a little bit more in a minute, came to the quarterfinals last year with 5 losses. So it's not unheard of. And even Hillcrest Evergreen, who Bayside beat to get here, was struggling a lot. I believe it had about the same record as Cedar Bluff last year, got to the semifinals. So everything is possible for you, especially when you have experience coming back. However, I don't feel this team, as I look at them, will get this far immediately. I think it'll take some time. Their offense is built for ball control. That's the best thing about them, so they'll always stay close in games. But ultimately, I don't think they'll get back here for another few years. But it was a good run for them for this year.
Definitely a step in the right direction for the Bayside Academy Admirals. Moving on to the second game of the day at 3 o'clock, we had Maplesville taking on Cedar Bluff. Maplesville, your champion last year, beating Hubbardsville. They're coming in this year. Cedar Bluff beat Decatur Heritage to get here. However, kind of same song, second verse for our gains. Maplesville all over Cedar Bluff. So the clear favorite. Who's your MVP, and why did they just run over Cedar Bluff?
First of all, the good news is Cedar Bluff actually scored this time. They did get points on the board their second go-around.
Yes.
They could take that from this. It's hard to argue with a record-setting performance, isn't it? Terrence Dunlap, 5 total touchdowns on the day. He breaks a record that he was tied with 2 other guys, a performance he had last year. So, I mean, it's hard to go against Terrence Dunlap. He was amazing. John, he's only a junior, so the guy's going to be back next year. He was the MVP last year in his performance. He deserved it again this year. He'll probably be the reason they get back to this point next year in 1A. The sky's the limit for Maplesville.
Yeah, not a lot of teams in 1A ready to challenge them, especially with this roster coming back. This is their 3rd appearance in the state championships, 2 wins in a row. Definitely looking for number 3 next year. Is there any one team that you think might can take Maplesville out? They did come in with a blemish on their record. They weren't undefeated. The only 2 teams are Clay and Spanish Fort. We'll see tomorrow, but is there anybody that in the playoffs, when they're at their strongest, we see it with Leeds, we see it with Hoover, they get in that playoff mentality. Maplesville is the same way. Is there anybody next year that might can knock them off?
Well, here's the thing you have to remember. First of all, they're about in the middle of the enrollment roster for 1A, so they're going to stay 1A. However, we don't know who's going to come into 1A next year. I looked at the bottom of 2A. You know who's there? The team that's there is Sweetwater. They were second lowest in 2A enrollment. And yeah, they didn't do well in 2A this year, but they're a 1A power from years past. They were the team that beat Cedar Bluff 6 years ago when they made it here. So Sweetwater has some experience in dominating 1A competition. So if they drop to 1A, that's an immediate contender to Maplesville. You also look, it's a stacked south half of 1A. You got Brantley, Billingsley. As long as those two don't move to 2A, they're close. They're on the edge. They could switch out. One of them could switch out with Sweetwater. You also have Linden, Keith. And don't forget how close Georgiana came to beating Maplesville in the quarterfinals, only an 8-point difference, 36-28.
Right.
So there are some challengers. If I'm going to pick anybody, I'm not going to go Georgiana because I think that's an experienced team. They're probably going to lose a lot of seniors this year. So I'm not going to go on a limb and say Georgiana off the bat. But there are quality teams that can challenge Maplesville. They will not have it easy while they're in 1A, and they'll be in there pretty much their entire time based on where their enrollment rosters are at. So there will be challengers.
Yeah, one thing we didn't really touch on in any of these previews or recaps is there is going to be a reclassification this year. Of course, it happens every 2 years. We're now in the second year of the new 7 classification system. That's not going anywhere. So these teams that might have jumped up to a classification or jumped down a classification because of this, they are going to most likely stay where they are. There's not going to probably be any super drastic changes, but we can see somebody like Sweetwater possibly jump down and be a power again in 1A.
Yeah, and I will say this. Officially, I will give Maplesville this. There are plenty of teams that could take them down, but officially, I don't think it'll stop Maplesville immediately. I think they'll probably get here at least 2 or 3 more times in the next 5 years. They're that good. They'll probably win every time they get here. They're that solid of a ball club. You see it here. They can just bring in new talent and rehash and rebuild, and so I think you'll see Maplesville around for the next 5 years or so, and they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, that rushing attack is going to be really hard to stop for anybody in 1A. So if you want to stop them, learn how to stop that rushing attack. It was amazing today for Maplesville. All right, last game of the night, 7 o'clock, just ended. St. Paul's repeat champion, their 3rd championship in 8 years, their 3rd championship in 4 appearances as well. One of the teams I think probably benefited the most from the 7 classification system. They stayed down in 5A. A lot of teams jumped up. Don't have to compete with teams like Spanish Fort anymore. A lot of teams kind of moved out. So St. Paul's has a run through. St. Paul Jackson, you think that's going to be the team to go to the championship. Sure enough, they played for it. St. Paul's got the rematch win over Jackson, comes back here for the 2nd straight year, and they just dominate Mortimer Jordan. Mortimer Jordan, I don't want to say they're a Cinderella story, only lost 1 game all year, and then beat that team again. But not the team a lot of people thought would come out of the North. You had teams like Pleasant Grove, who was here last year, even though that was upset. Gunnersville, Winona went undefeated. A lot of great teams from 5A, but Mortimer Jordan ended up here, didn't quite get it done, but still made the championship. So St. Paul's has seen the game film on Mortimer Jordan. They saw that Alexandria, the 1 game they lost, how many passes? 3?
Yeah,
3
passes.
total passes the entire game.
3 passes, then 6 in the rematch. I think that's why Alexandria lost. They doubled their passing
you
total.
can't pass the ball against the team. But, hey, guess what? St. Paul, first drive of the game, they waste over 6 minutes driving down the field, put 7 on the board, and that kind of set the tone for the rest of the game.
15 plays, 71 yards, 6:14 off that clock.
Unbelievable. So, did the lack of possession time hurt Mortimer Jordan? The fact that St. Paul's held the ball so long in that first half?
Based solely on the first quarter, you could say yes. The difference was 10-17 to 143. When it's that wide of a margin, yeah, there's obviously some factors in there. It also helped that St. Paul's actually scored touchdowns on those drives. If they scored just 2 field goals, then we're looking at a completely different ball game. Mortimer Jordan then all he has to score 1 touchdown. All of a sudden they're in the lead. So you have to finish the drives at the end of the day. As much as you want to hold on to the ball and possess it, you still have to get points off of it, and they did that. That's credit to them. But in the end, no, the time possession became a lot closer. It really didn't mean that much. Mortimer Jordan, simply, this came down to the fact that they didn't adjust as soon as they should have. St. Paul, by the time before they even knew it hit them, St. Paul's up 27-6 at the half, and it was pretty much over by that point because Mortimer Jordan, they could slow down St. Paul, but they couldn't completely stop them. And in the end, that's going to cost them every time.
And with Mortimer Jordan, we talk about on defense, teams run the ball against them a lot, but on offense, it's not like they're an air attack team, but they can throw the ball very well. They didn't really do it. They tried to keep it on the ground, not real smart play calling. Hodges had, the quarterback from Mortimer Jordan, had over 2,600 yards coming into this game and hardly moved the ball around at all in the first half. Why did they use the ground attack more in the first half? Why didn't they try to adjust? I mean, there has to be some reason why they kept going with that attack.
I mean, first of all, their base is option. They like to run option. They like to run that option to set up the pass. Hodges has feet. He can run. He's racked up a good amount of rushing yards, over 700 rushing yards this year, so he's not just a thrower. He can move. I think Dusty Goog got a little stubborn. I hate to call out a coach unless it's absolutely necessary. This is absolutely necessary. The staff got way too stubborn about trying to run the football to set up the pass when it should have been what they did in the second half, which worked, was pass to set up the run, because they started to be able to run the football a little bit better while they went more of a pass attack, even out of that option offense. I really thought, honestly, you and I were sitting in the booth, I said, I don't know why they're not going to a shotgun spread set. I guess it's just not in their repertoire, but honestly, there was nothing good about their setup to play a team like St. Paul's, who's designed to beat you up most of the time, especially when they're a ground and pound offense. You think the defense is going to be able to just absolutely destroy you on the ground. It was a bad decision from the get-go. If it had worked, we would have said, hey, it's a great game plan, but it didn't work, and you had to adjust a little quicker, and by the time they adjusted, they're down by 21. You see what happens. They end up not being able to – they fall short of a comeback. They actually outscored St. Paul's in the second half.
When you're down that much, it doesn't really matter how much you outscore them.
Yeah.
You got to way outscore them to try to win that game, but coming back to the rushing attack, that's how St. Paul's really got ahead of them. The ground and pound, McPherson was just all over the place. If you watched the game, you saw he definitely was the MVP of the game, and he ended up winning that. What does it say when a team like Mortimer Jordan did go to Guntersville and stop Jordan Bentley, a name you heard every single week? Jordan Bentley, in my opinion, should be a Mr. Football candidate, no doubt. Should definitely be nominated for 5A Back of the Year. They stuffed him, shut out Guntersville. I think Guntersville only had just a little over 100 yards the entire game when they played, and they lost 26-0 to Mortimer Jordan. McPherson comes in, St. Paul's, and he runs all over him. So what does it say about St. Paul's rushing attack that makes them so great?
They're good as advertised. That's really what it says, plain and simple. They do what they do, and they do it well. Jordan Bentley, let's be honest, he's a little bit of a tall tale in some respects. He is good. He's good, no doubt. But their offense is completely built around him. They're not a passing attack. They're very much like Alexandria, except they only have one real rusher. Alexandria likes to spread out the wealth when they run the football. So when you're able to key on a guy like Bentley, you're able to shut him down and make sure that the whole offense goes flat at that point. So I think it was more of a case of St. Paul's is just who they are. They brought their identity to the game, and they did exactly what they wanted to do, which was run with McPherson and dominate the ground. And Mortimer Jordan had no answer for it. It does say a lot about McPherson that he, though, can outwork Bentley in this case against the same defense. I will give McPherson that. He did a much better job by himself than Bentley did by himself. But there are more weapons to St. Paul's. That's obvious. So I think also the fact, that we have to forget Jordan couldn't stop a potent rush offense in Alexandria. Both times they gave up over 35 points to that squad. So each time they played the Valley Cubs, it was no-go. So I think we knew coming in that Mortimer Jordan was going to struggle with the run game. I don't think we knew that they were going to struggle quite this much in the first half the way they did. McPherson was all over them from the get-go. But the biggest difference is it was that St. Paul, just had a defense that could keep the option attack for Mortimer Jordan, muffled. And then St. Paul's offense just did what it's been doing all season. Just give it to McPherson, hand it off, run it, mix in a little pass every now and then, mix in some quarterback runs, mix in some other running backs into the game. But overall, it's McPherson. And the offensive line, who was a bit undersized. That offensive line,
they were small, yeah.
310 was the center, but after him it was all 225 and lower. The problem for Mortimer Jordan is their biggest defensive lineman was in the 215, 220 range. So they got just pushed around all night. And the offensive line, give a lot of credit to St. Paul's. It really says a lot more about the offensive line than it does anything else.
All right, so the way the playoffs work here is the North sends a champion, the South sends a champion. We saw St. Paul's, Jackson. There's not a soul I talked to this season that said St. Paul nor Jackson was going to win the state championship. One of those two teams.
Yeah.
Mortimer Jordan comes in from the North. A little bit of a surprise. Not a surprise at all that St. Paul's is here. However, do you think that Jackson is the second best team in the state after watching this? Who's going to be your top five, starting with St. Paul's down?
Well, we'll go 5-1. We'll start with I'm going to go with a tie for 5. I'm going to give Alexandria and Guntersville a slot. I'm going to put Demopolis at honorable mention. Problem was Demopolis didn't play a great schedule for the most part. They got beat up by really good teams when they did play them. Remember, they got beat up by both Jackson and St. Paul's both times they played them. So Demopolis, honorable mention. But Alexandria, you look at them, they beat Mortimer Jordan in the regular season. They beat Pleasant Grove in the playoffs and Russellville. They had to go into Russellville, which we've been there. It's no easy place to go in and win a ball game.
Right.
And then, for Guntersville, 2 years in a row they go unbeaten in the regular season. Very, very accomplished. And they beat two 6A teams in Arab, not as good, but Albertville, a playoff team out of 6A. So you got to give them a lot of credit. And obviously, you mentioned how well Jordan Bentley played. The fact they did this so one-dimensional has to be a lot said for that. So I think those are your tie for number 5. Number 4 is Beauregard. Beauregard was a surprise this year. I don't think anybody saw the Hornets coming the way they did. They were unbeaten, beat Helena in the playoffs, and then they took Jackson to the limit. Remember, 31-28 was the final of that game. Beauregard was just a hair away from being St. Paul's opponent in the semifinals. And then not only that, they averaged Clay Chalkville-like numbers on offense, 47.6 points a game. They were very, very good on offense. They were stout. They scored 82 points in their final regular season game. They were all over things. So Beauregard definitely deserves top 5 spot. Jordan has to be 3 because simply, first of all, give them a lot of credit. There's 3 because they made the first state title game. They avenged their only loss of the regular season, and their only loss after that is, the state champion. But you said it. This is 1A and 1B. Now, because St. Paul's won the rematch in the playoffs, then won the state title, they're 1. Jackson's 2. But it could have just have easily been the other way around. We could have been looking at Jackson tonight as the state champion. So, in the end, St. Paul's is 1, Jackson 2, Mortimer Jordan 3, Beauregard, and then a tie at the end with Alexandria and Guntersville. St. Paul's, though, they went through a lot of tough competition this season, and they earned every bit of this, especially getting to avenge their loss to Jackson in the playoffs on the road.
Absolutely. All right, so we have our champions from day 2. 3A, we have Piedmont over Bayside Academy. 1A, we have Maplesville over Cedar Bluff. 5A, St. Paul's repeating again over Mortimer Jordan. So, Daniel, Jon Lunceford for ALPreps.com. We'll bring you our preview for 4A, 2A, and 6A coming up tomorrow, including that matchup, Clay Chalkville, Spanish Fort. We'll see you tomorrow, guys.